Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
a podcast for parents, college counselors, students, and anyone who wants a weekly deep dive into the world of college admissions.
Hi, I'm Susan, and I'm a college counselor and have read applications for a small liberal arts college and 2 research universities. My twins are recent college graduates.
I'm Lisa, and I'm a clinical psychologist and college counselor. I have a daughter in college, a daughter in high school, and a son in middle school. After 30 years in Chicago, we recently moved to North Carolina.
My name is Mark. I'm a college coach in Atlanta and the parent of 2 daughters. Karis, a graduate of Davidson College, and she is the founder of the Spanish tutoring company, SpanishHelpToday.com. And Joy is a graduate of the University of Georgia, and she is getting her master's degree at North Carolina State University. Friends, it is with great enthusiasm and alacrity I come before you today for what is our first ever Monday episode. And I am jacked up. I'm fired up. So what can you expect on these Monday episodes? Well, we're no longer going to do announcements on Thursday. We're going to move announcements from Thursday to Monday. So on Thursday episodes, we're just going to jump right in with admissions tip. No more admissions tip, admission vernacular, big number, rants or raves on Monday episodes, with the one exception being today, our inaugural one. I have to kick it off just because I just do, because it's historic. No recommended resource. Mostly it's going to be me doing announcements and a preview of the interview, but it could be any of our hosts. Anyone on our team could do this. So we'll just see how it kind of all plays out. So let's kick it off. Let's start right now with our announcements. So, North Dakota Public Schools going test optional. It's a pretty big story. This came out just May 27th, that no longer will North Dakota schools require ACT or SAT scores. This was reported in the Bismarck Tribune. And the thing about this is a permanent decision. This is not one of these 1 or 2 year trials or even 3 or 4 year trials. And this will be effective fall of 2023. It's about to get a lot more expensive to borrow money for college. If you're following the news, interest rates are going up. That means interest rates for federal loans will go up. Expected to be the biggest jump since 2013. So I'm referring to federal loans. They're expected to rise by more than a percentage point due to the Treasury Department's auction of 10-year notes. Now, rates on new student loans will be effective July 1st, and they are expected to go to 4.99% on new federal direct undergraduate loans, and that's up from 3.73%. Of course, these are 1-year loans. Now, obviously, graduate students and Parent Plus loans, you're going to pay a lot more. So the new Plus loans are expected to go from 6.28 to 7.54, and no, they also come with a much heftier loan origination fee, almost 4 times as much. Biden is expected to make good on his campaign promise to wipe out $10,000 of federal student debt. Now, the details are still being worked out, but there's some insiders who have been sharing some scoops with Washington Post. In fact, one thing they shared was that announcement was going to be made at the University of Delaware right when the Texas massacre occurred, backing it up to some date in June. So details could change. There's still some last-second hagglings going on. But here's what's coming out so far from multiple reporters. It's expected to apply to singles, tax filer status, filing singles, $150,000 or less, married couples, $300,000 or less, which is 97% of the population. It's expected to wipe out 1/3 of the 44 million adults now with student debt, with federal loans. And I will say this, it's controversial, quite controversial, actually. So the detractors would say, 1, it isn't getting to the root of the problem. And to get to the root of the problem, you got to look at the whole loan system that allows Grad Plus loans and Parent Plus loans to go up to cost of attendance and many other things. You also have to challenge schools as well. One other concern is it could spur inflation. Another concern is that it should be targeted to moderately resourced and under-resourced families, not families making up to $300,000. Some others say that it isn't fair to those who've already paid back their loans. And others still say that it will encourage irresponsible behavior. But the proponents say Biden made a promise and needs to keep it. Some people got into these loans with deceitful marketing. So many right now are in default or in delinquency, and the federal government is actually paying more money to private bill collectors than they're actually collecting. So they should do what other businesses do, get some bad debt off the books. And the Pell Grant, which was originally supposed to cover the majority of the costs for students, has not only not kept pace with that, it hasn't even kept pace with inflation. So one study showed that it's only 29% of covering 29% of what it was supposed to cover. So that was actually created 50 years ago in 1972 by Claiborne Pell, senator from Rhode Island. And so, in other words, the government has been walking away from its commitment to make college affordable. And so the least they can do is wipe out some of the debt that some students had to take or they wouldn't have been able to pursue a college education. Okay, New Mexico is going beyond what other larger and more prosperous states like Washington and Tennessee have done already. Those states offered a tuition assistance program, but it was primarily to community colleges. Actually, almost half the states in the country have a program now. But normally they would exclude residents from the program, either because their income was too high, or they would impose conditions like requiring students to work part-time. But in this rare consensus, across the aisle consensus, the Democrats and Republicans came together to pass a pretty bold tuition-free initiative in New Mexico. And one thing that got the measure passed is the shortage of nurses in the state. Another thing that got it passed is the great concern that residents were leaving New Mexico and going to places like Texas. So the argument was, let's make this investment in them, looking at a lot of the research that shows that a lot of times people end up living where they graduate. All right, so those are announcements for the day. The only other one I want to share is we do have these 25 senior admission leaders who have agreed to be interviewed, most in the summer, some in the fall. I read a list of all of them with their names and schools at the start of Thursday's episode. I'm not going to do that again, but we will put them in the show notes. The only two I won't put on there are St. John's College in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and in Maryland, and my alma mater, Michigan State University, just simply because this goes live on Monday, June 6th, and those interviews happen that week. So by the time you heard this and got me any suggestions, it would be too late. But what we're looking to do is take at least 2 questions from our listeners. And I'll tell you a little secret. Most people don't respond to stuff like this. So there's a good chance that you can get your questions asked if you send them in. How do you send them in? My preferred way would be you go to our Twitter feed, which is at YCBK podcast, and use the message tab and just message me directly. That's the easiest way for me to track it in one spot. But if you're not on Twitter, you just don't feel like using Twitter, you could also email us at questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com and send in our questions and take a look at the schools, because we'll put them in the show notes. If it's a school of interest to you, we'd love to have your questions. The rest of the questions will be comprised by our co-hosts. We're working right now with Lisa, with Susan, with Julia, with Vince. We're the college counselors. Dave's doing his Dr. Real Estate thing, so he's not in on this. But the college counselors on our co-host team, we're all working together and coming up with a list of questions. So we'll comprise the bulk of the others, but we want to have listeners included. All right. As I said, this is the one time I am going to do an admissions tip, just because it's the inaugural Monday episode, and vernacular and big number. And then I'll do an interview preview, and then it's all interview. So our admissions tip. Now, this is a great question for you to ask, you meaning students. You could ask at a number of places. It would be a great question to ask at a college fair if you went by a table. It'd be a great question for you to ask in an interview. It'd be a great question for you to ask if an admission rep came to your school and did a small info session, whether that was in Zoom or in person. And here's the question. What is one change in your most recent strategic plan that you're excited about? Now, don't be surprised because if you hear that, because I've already decided I'm going to use that question as one of my questions I'll be asking to my interviewees later. Okay, admissions vernacular. And I wanted to do this partly now because I'm going to have a part 2 on the same topic on Thursday's podcast. But the term is shaping. What is shaping? Well, this applies to more selective schools, schools that get more applications than spots, schools that use waitlists. And what happens, and I've shared this with you all before, people go into admissions because they love kids and they love their school, the university, or college, and they really want to make a difference. And so you get attached to kids. And when you're reading files, it's very hard to deny a waitlist as many kids as you need to deny a waitlist, even though a lot of schools have oversight by senior level admissions people where they give you updates like what ratios you kind of need to be accepting to stay on pace for the target number. Remember, every school knows how many dorms they need to fill and how many spots they need for the budget. And they have historical projected models of how many kids they need to admit to get to the proper number. Well, it's all but impossible to not have too many admits when you first go through the process. Even that you're reading and rating, and like I said, you're sometimes getting warnings, hey, you guys are taking too many, this committee is admitting too many or whatever. So when all that's done, so you don't have the problem like so many colleges have had where they over-enrolled, what happens is what's called shaping. And shaping involves oversight from senior level admissions staff, looking at the institutional priorities and making sure that there are enough kids in all of the different buckets to bring in a well-rounded class. Now, if you are regular listeners know, I talked about Slate, the CRM, customer relation management software that is used by so many colleges. They have a function that can allow you to do that can do some of this for you. They can project and spew out all the numbers, but that would still be done in conjunction with senior level people. And that's really, really painful for admissions people because you've gotten attached to kids. And now you thought your kids that you wanted were admits. And now some of them will get flipped into waitlist. And the kid never knows it. They just get a waitlist. They never know how close they might have been to getting an admit. But that whole process is called shaping. All right. And our big number today is 300 million. And that is what the University of Texas has already created in an endowed fund to try to do similar things to what New Mexico and some other states are doing, which is come up with some free version of college. So we have to wait to see what their proposal is, but it's in the works as state by state keeps adding programs, usually on the community college level, but sometimes on the public 4-year level, school level as well. All right, my interview. This interview is exciting to me. It's with Scott Muir, the project director of the National Humanities Alliance. Now, in episode 207, we took a look at what's going on with the humanities. Why have they dropped 8 straight years in a row with this fixation on STEM? And Scott is a listener to our podcast. And so he heard the discussion. He liked it a lot. And he reached out to me. We had a great conversation. I was actually in North Carolina at the time. And I really liked him a lot. I like what he stood for. I did a little bit of research on him. And presto, here you have him today as our guest. So here's my intro. Scott works at the National Humanities Alliance. It's a member-supported coalition dedicated to advocating for the value of the humanities in communities and on campuses. And he's a project director there, but he specifically leads a project called Study the Humanities. And this is a Mellon Foundation-funded initiative that provides humanities faculty administrators and advocates with evidence-based resources and strategies to make the case for studying the humanities as an undergraduate. So I'm not going to go through all the questions I asked Scott in this interview. I was originally just going to do a recommended resource with Scott, but we got into 90 seconds in and I called an audible. I was like, Scott, you got too much stuff here for me to put in a 2 to 3 minute recommended resource. How about we do a full-blown half-an-hour interview? And so some of the questions I asked Scott are, what are the humanities and how do humanities grads do in the workforce? But that just touches the surface. I asked him about a dozen questions. I think you're going to really like it. Listen and enjoy our first Monday episode ever of Your College Bound Kid. Friends, our recommended resource today is going to be the National Humanities Alliance, and we're fortunate enough to have the project director, Scott Muir, here with us today. Hi, Scott.
Hi, how are you, Mark?
Good. So Scott's had a number of roles. He's been a past professor, instructor at Emory and Duke in Western Carolina, but now he's the project director of the National Humanities Alliance. And why don't you talk to us about what the National Humanities Alliance is, Scott?
Sure. So the National Humanities Alliance advocates for the value of studying the humanities, which are history, studying languages, culture, philosophy, religious studies, all those different disciplines, as well as the humanistic social sciences, anthropology, sociology, etc. So we advocate for the value of all of these things at every level of education and also in public programming. So every state has a state humanities council. The National Endowment for Humanities funds those things, and we advocate for that funding. It does really wonderful programming all around the country. And my role specifically is focused on undergraduate education. So I direct a project called Study the Humanities, which is all about supporting efforts to attract more students to the humanities, and in the context of a decline in enrollments in humanities, which you've talked about on this podcast before.
Yeah, friends, Scott's a listener to our podcast, so he heard us talking about this and he reached out to me, and it's a subject close to my heart. So a lot of families will say that sounds interesting, it's fascinating, the topic, but I need my child to end up with a job and not one at Starbucks. So what do you say to that family that says, hey, nice, but I need a job pathway?
Sure, yeah, and especially with the rising cost of education, it's understandable that people are more sensitive to this and more concerned about the return on their investment. But the evidence really does not support the notion that humanities majors struggle mightily in any kind of way. In fact, they come out ahead of a lot of other career fields. They're kind of right in the middle when it comes down to average income earned. And that middle includes both lots of people succeeding in high-earning fields with humanities degrees, in business, in law, in lots of different areas, in government, and also people choosing to forego their most lucrative opportunities to be teachers, to be librarians, to do things that are good for our society, that make them happy, that maybe are not the most money that they could possibly make, but they're also great sustainable careers as well.
You know, Scott, I know that's music to people's ears, but I'm sure there's a listener out there that says, I love it, that sounds fantastic, but what's the proof? Can you talk a little bit about, there's a research side, I think, that you guys are involved in as well, isn't there?
Yeah, so we have our website is studythehumanities.org, specifically for this project, and on that website you'll find a toolkit of arguments for studying the humanities, which are really about debunking the misperceptions about career prospects, most of them. They're also about the great life benefits that you get from studying the humanities and the leaders in many different fields who have humanities backgrounds. But, mostly what we're doing there is showing that humanities majors earn comparable salaries. They're satisfied with their careers. They're employed at comparable rates. So there's this myth in the culture, that like you're going to end up waiting tables, you're going to end up underemployed, you're going to end up living in your parents' basement. And that happens to college students of all different fields of study. And it's really more about your personal development and hitting the ground running and doing the high impact practices in college, like internships and working with the Career Center and doing the things you need to do to put yourself in a good position to really get out there and hit the job market when you finish. One of the things we do on our project also is work with humanities faculty and administrators on doing that work better, on building in better career preparation into humanities programs. And there's a lot of energy behind that these days. So I think that this is something that maybe some humanities faculty in the past didn't think was necessarily their job, and they're taking it on as their job now to really, both in terms of advising their students and creating opportunities for their students to get job experience, to put them in a position where they're leaving college with a strong set of foundational skills in writing and reading and critical thinking and all these things that employers, if you look at surveys of employers and what they say they want, those are the things they want. But they're also importantly getting, work experiences and internship experiences that help provide some content experience for that resume as well.
Now, does your research sort of show that all subject areas sort of correlate the same to the job market, or are there differences between like philosophy and English and history and, foreign languages, or is it all pretty much similar and it's all about like, who got the right internship as opposed to what you studied?
That's a really great question. And, the data that we have, it's complicated and it's sometimes hard to sift through and parse things that precisely. But, there are some patterns, like, for instance, philosophy majors are particularly prone to become high earners by mid-career. They don't always earn a high salary immediately after college, but there's actually been some studies done of long-term earning potential that have shown that philosophy majors have made more than computer sciences on science majors on average when you're talking about looking at them, mid-late career in their 50s and that kind of a data point. History majors have also done well on those kind of particularly well on those long-term career measures. And there's I'm sure some fields that are a little bit below those sort of averages, but they're all pretty much in that middle range. I mean, if you look at any kind of humanities major stacked up against all the different ranges of majors, you're going to see a healthy mass of majors that are below them, which are often majors that seem more practical on the face of things. And then there's going to be some very high earning majors. Nobody's trying to, I'm not trying to blow smoke and say that the humanities major is the surest bet to a high earning job right out of college. Petroleum engineer has been the best bet, but is that the best long-term bet? I don't know.
And of course, if you don't do something you love, then your life sucks. So
that is the most important thing. Yes, exactly. Exactly.
That's
Appreciate
important.
That, Mark.
So obviously, this is encouraging what you're sharing, but why is the public perception so different than what you're sharing? Like, where is all that noise coming from? Because it's very loud. It's like a tsunami.
It's very loud, yeah. I think about this all the time, and it's hard to sort of completely have a lot of confidence in knowing where it all comes from. But I think a lot of it just comes from a failure of imagination, and that it does require imagination. It requires imagination on the part of the students and on the part of their parents. And it requires a little bit of a leap of faith of like, if you dig really deep into something that you're passionate about and you give it your best effort and think really hard about it and develop a lot of skills to express yourself around these passions, that like you're going to be able to then find your way to making that work in our economy and translate and transfer those skills. There is a transfer and a translation that has to happen. That is not the case for somebody studying petroleum engineering. There's no translation. They know what they're preparing to do and they know what the job is and they go right at it. Now, that also comes with a downside because it's harder to adapt if you have a narrowly technical training. So I would say that humanities majors, it's kind of a double-edged sword. It's like, on the one hand, there are these widely transferable skills that employers across the board of a lot of industries say they really want and need and are very important to them. So you have all kinds of opportunities and options, but sometimes that first couple steps right out of college can be a little tricky because you don't know necessarily what industry you want to work in, and you got to figure it out. And there can be a sort of, as we would say in the humanities, a liminal space, a sort of in-between moment where you have to sort of work out that transition. And it can be a little bit more challenging. But I think a lot of it is just they don't see the one-to-one connection. And so it's a question mark in people's minds of how that works, because it works differently for every single individual, and there's no clear roadmap or easy answer.
No, I think you're really onto something. Like, I think, I want you to correct me if I'm wrong, but my theory, I've got a couple theories on this. One is a lot of times people are just looking at first-year earnings. And so if you look at those studies on first-year earnings, then, yeah, it's inevitable that some of the STEM fields have higher first-year earnings. And the other thing, and I think you were alluding to this in what you just recently said, I think the average person doesn't realize how many times somebody's employed in something that's not exactly what their college major is, right?
Oh, yeah. You've made this point before, and I really appreciate you making it again. I mean, it's such an important point that's the vast majority of people do not have that one-to-one relationship, right?
Well, it's really important because I think when people see something like philosophy or history or English or Latin or, a lot of things, they think, what do you do with that? And They're like, I don't meet that many people that are philosophers that are self-supportive, but they don't realize just, I mean, I've seen studies as many as 8 in 10 people are not employed in something directly aligned with their major. And I think that's particularly hard for people that are in one of those fields where they are aligned. Like I got a nursing degree and I'm a nurse, I went off, I got an engineering degree and I'm an engineer. And so that's kind of the way they think it works for most people, but it actually doesn't. Any thoughts on what I shared there?
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. And I think part of that is that, another statistic that dovetails with that is that most people get jobs through their personal connections. And, there's a dark side to that system and, but it's just kind of the way it works. People like to work with, bring people on that they know and trust and have connections with. And, I think that's part of why humanities majors find their way with such, great, that they so often do find their way because, you make strong connections and they're curious about people. And the main thing about working connections, which sounds like kind of a little bit of a, phrase that maybe has a little bit of an oily connotation to it or something, but really it's about relationships and it's about connecting with people. And the main way you do that is by being interested in the person you're talking to. And that's something humanities majors are really good at, because what you do in the humanities is you get interested in people different from yourself. And you kind of try to get outside of yourself and you think about what it might be like to be a different person from yourself. And that is just a really valuable skill in life, and it's really valuable for getting jobs.
No, I think you're right. And I see how, I feel like everything you're saying sort of, it also can encompass like sociology and psychology and as well. Wouldn't you agree? I mean, my
Totally.
My youngest daughter started out in psych and switched to soc and absolutely loves soc for these very reasons, like your ability to understand people from different lenses and perspectives.
Absolutely. I studied a lot of social sciences as well. I'm very much a hybrid humanities social science guy. I studied psychology as an undergrad and, see a lot of value in those fields too. I think that the social sciences are in basically a similar boat in terms of their career outcomes, but I think people are less prone to question the value of it because it's numbers, right? And because data analysis is clearly a valuable skill. And so people are less prone to question the value of a social science degree. But, in reality, the other thing is you have to be who you are and you have to play to your own strengths. And
that's really important.
Numbers are not everybody's strength, and some folks, I talk to a lot of people who are good at numbers, are good at science, and they love the humanities and they choose to do that. And that's really great. And then there's also students who they're clearly stronger in the area of critically analyzing texts and writing carefully thought out papers and making, really nuanced arguments about things. And those are skills that are actually just as valued in the workplace, but it's not as clear as the numerical analysis, those kind of analytical skills.
I'm thinking of a couple of things. I know Mark Cuban, owner of the Dallas Mavericks, has been very outspoken about, the need, the future is in fields like the humanities, and they're going to have an edge in the job market. And then I interviewed someone named Don Shahar, who founded a test prep company, and it's grown pretty rapidly. And he says the number one thing he looks for is critical thinking skills. And there's an aspect where these disciplines really enhance your ability to think as well as communicate. And so employers value that. And then we've heard a lot about how that's a skill that's dying off, whether it's so much time on social media or television watching. But the mind is like a muscle, right? And it like atrophies if you're not using it. So have you seen any research to show that employers are looking for this skill set?
Yeah, absolutely. So the American Association of Colleges and Universities, ACMU, they put out an employer survey every year about what skills employers most value. The National Association of Counselors and Employers, NACE, they do the same. You look at either of those studies, they come out every year. It's always communication skills, critical thinking. Those are the ones at the top. And they're the ones that are widely valued in all industries and that really transfer across industries. And that's been consistent and none of that has changed. And so you're right, these myths and these prejudices and misconceptions about it have really gained momentum. And I think part of that is also just the success that folks promoting STEM education, they've really been able to do that in an effective way. And that's all really positive. We don't take any issue with that. But I think that there's and also scientists and engineers, and we have a lot of support for among the science community and the engineering community of go take some humanities classes, guys. You need this too. You need to be able to learn how to write, and we're not going to be able to teach you that. And so it's not really coming from the science community so much. It's the way the popular culture has consumed what I call STEMism, which is this notion that in the 21st century, and if you're not majoring in any one of those kinds of fields, then you are just, you're going to be left behind. When I think there's really more to Mark Cuban's argument on this, that as things get automated, as technical tasks become automated, as more things that we have relied on humans to do that computers can do get done by computers, we need more of the skills that computers can't do. And that's what the humanities give you.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Because that's positioning yourself for the future. That's great. So you've heard the podcast, no first-time interviewee comes on without going on the hot seat. So I'm going to put you on the hot seat, and then afterward, I want you to give you an opportunity to share with our listeners sort of other resources that they can access, and I want you to talk about your podcast as well. So,
sure, great.
Ready for the hot seat, though?
Ready.
What's on your bucket list? What's one thing you haven't done you definitely want to do before you leave this place?
Oh, wow. So I would say, I love to travel.
Mm-hmm.
I've never been anywhere. The farthest east I've traveled is Jordan. And I've never been to sort of Asia proper. And Japan and Indonesia are kind of at the top of that list of places that I want to go.
Awesome.
So that's kind of an easy answer, but
there you go. Get to Japan and Indonesia. So when you're traveling, what's one of your pet peeves?
I think, it's funny. Before I was a parent, I might have said the crying baby on the plane.
Funny how parenting will change that.
And parenting will change that, right? And so now I think I would say it's the person who is just kind of oblivious to the fact that their needs and experience exist in a context where, we're trying to get all these people on this plane, so they're being asked some inconvenience of themselves, like wear a mask or something.
Sure.
And they go off because they don't want to do that. And I think parenting also teaches you this, just the ways that you observe people so wrapped up in their own experience that they don't see that they kind of need to roll with the larger thing that's going on around them.
Cool. So I know you've been in the classroom. We mentioned that before. Duke, Emory, Western Carolina. What's the most interesting experience you had teaching a class at the college level?
Wow, yeah. Well, I taught Western religious traditions, an intro to Judaism, Christianity, and Islam at Western Carolina for a number of years, and I loved teaching that class, and I loved my students there, and it was just really wonderful to kind of tour those traditions and put them in conversation with one another. But I'll kind of pivot from there to, I was lucky to be a TA of a class called Religion and Hip Hop at Duke with Joseph Winters, who's a phenomenal professor. And, that's funny because sometimes people will sort of, humanities faculty are trying to get more interest in their students, right? And so they're trying to teach classes like this that just connect with students' interests that they already have and that they already bring to the table, and kind of use that as a way into deeper critical thinking about the things that interest their students. And so that's the kind of class that some people might look at and be like, religion and hip hop, that sounds like, but it was one of the most intellectually stimulating undergraduate classes I can possibly imagine. I mean, we got into the post-industrial American urban situation and how that is the socio-political context and economic context for the emergence of hip hop, and got into all kinds of issues around the relating of the sacred and different kinds of traditions and where people are coming from, making that music, and gender issues and race issues and all that. And Anyway, it kind of got into everything and used students' interest in and appreciation for that music as the way in, and it was phenomenal.
Good stuff. Good stuff. And didn't you get a PhD from Duke?
I did.
Good stuff. Awesome. Talk to us a little bit about your guilty pleasure that you shouldn't eat, but you eat it anyway.
Oh my gosh, that's an easy one. Smart food popcorn, which is not the worst thing to eat, maybe, but like I eat an entire bag at a time, basically.
Sure.
Once it pops, it is not going to stop. And,
it's over.
It's over. Yeah.
All right. I always like to close with this. What's your best advice for students and for parents?
I mean, it's really kind of the same. It's trust yourself and trust your kid. When you're making a decision about what to study in college, you're talking about 4 years of your life and how you want to spend them. And then you're talking about where that goes for the rest of your life, and that's kind of all we have, really. That is what ultimately matters, is how you spend your time on this earth. And so I just think that, there's all kinds of reasons to be afraid, and there's all kinds of reasons to try to be practical and hard-headed. But at the end of the day, you got to trust yourself that what you want to get up and do in the morning is like the thing that is there for you. And the same is true for your child, and creating space for them to own that and encouraging that is what it's all about. And that's what the thing I would encourage.
Awesome. Great stuff. Well, listen, before I let you go, you got to talk to us about your podcast and really any of the resources that are on the website. Like, what could somebody find if they were to go to, to your website? And make sure you give us the website, one last time as well.
Yeah. So studythehumanities.org. And I mentioned the toolkit. That's really, some of the stuff is really kind of more for faculty and administrators in the humanities, resources to help them.
Sure. What about for a parent, which is mostly our audience?
Right. So for parents, I would point you to the podcast first and foremost, because the numbers you can process really quickly, and they show you that like these myths about humanities majors aren't really true. But you're still probably going to have questions, because that doesn't replace the sort of vague lack of sense you have of how a humanities major leads to a sustainable career with a more positive sense of the possibilities. It's people's stories that do that. And humanities pathways are so varied, you can't really capture it fully in a data set because it's a very varied and nuanced data set.
Sure.
So you can get the broad contours, but you really got to listen to people's stories. And so the podcast is called What Are You Going to Do With That? There's two podcasts that have that name. One of them is about PhD students, and this one is about humanities majors in the undergrad context. So you can kind of see that distinction there. But these stories are powerful. It's stories of people who, thought they wanted to be doctors or lawyers because they went into college with like basically 3 ideas about the careers: doctor, lawyer, business person.
Right. I just talked to somebody last night, family I'm working with in Illinois, and the mom said, I grew up, all I knew were 3 careers: medicine, engineering, and computer science. And that was it.
Yep.
That's all I knew.
And I think that's especially true for a lot of international students where it's like those.
This was a South Asian family. Yeah.
Totally. Yeah. South Asian context for sure. But we have a couple of folks from that kind of a background who talk about, stepping out of that, and it was a little bit tough to do that. And there was some friction that they had to work through, but how it made all the difference for them and was the path that they needed to take. So you hear these stories and, it's people who just kind of forge their own path. And by the way, like one of these people does become a lawyer and is very, very successful at it. So it's not to.
Yeah, philosophy is one of the most common undergrad degrees for law.
Yep. I mean, really, in studying literature, studying history, also great preparation for a law career.
Right, history, English, political science, all that, yeah.
All that is great, yeah, political science, of course, and but medicine too. I mean, so, we have a doctor that who will be in season 2, who's doing amazing work on the Navajo reservation, and he talks a lot about how it's actually, if you can get the prereqs done, humanities major is going to increase your chances of getting into. There's data that backs that up. They want those people, and they're more distinctive than the biology major by far. So, but a lot of these people do things that are very unexpected. Like one of them, she developed just a real deep interest in fine food, and she's now a VP of a seed company that is like scientists and seed breeders working with chefs to make heirloom, like basically new heirloom vegetables, if that even makes sense. So it's like anyway, so there's so many niche jobs. I mean, the amazing thing about the 21st century job market is you can literally make money doing anything that you have a passion to do. You can make a business around that. And so those stories are really fun. But basically the themes across the stories are, I worked really hard at this in college because I loved it and I got a lot smarter. And then I went out in the world and I figured it out. And those skills that I honed in those classrooms came real and handy, in all, my writing skills and all the places I've worked. That was the key thing that sort of set me apart. So anyway, those are kind of the themes in the podcast, and encourage folks to listen to stories. They're also just really entertaining stories and really fine folks doing great work in the world.
Scott, this is great. It's been fantastic. Say the name of the podcast one last time.
What are you going to do with that?
Awesome. Thank you so much. Really appreciate you coming on.
All right. Thanks so much, Mark. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Oh, my pleasure. Friends, after I go over what you can expect in episode 229, I want to read a very special letter to you and an excerpt from a book that Dave and I constantly preach, Where You'll Go Is Not Who You'll Be by Frank Bruni, that we both regard as just a must read. So I'm going to ask that you just don't click off and tune us out now and check out, but you listen, because it's just, to me, it's just really important, and I think you'll agree once you hear it. Next week in the news, how Stevens Tech attracts applicants and students. That'll be our discussion, and it'll be Vince Garcia's official inaugural session with us now that he's officially in our rotation. He's been on the podcast before as a substitute, but now he's in the regular rotation. A question from a listener: I don't know if you're interested in this, but I would really love to see some topics on your podcast regarding the first year of college transition. It's just so different from when we went to college. And my daughter's experience is just so different from mine that my own intuition is just not helping me as much as I'd like. I am in a parent Facebook group, thanks to your interview with Linda Depker on the parent Facebook groups. And I'm reading The Naked Roommate Parent's Guide, thanks to Lisa's suggestion. But there are just a lot of issues that are not discussed that I wonder about. That's from Diana in Wisconsin, and she sent us some very specific questions that were outstanding, and we're going to be covering them over the next couple weeks. Our interview is with Karen Kristoff, the Dean of Admission at Colorado College. Karen's got over 30 years experience at multiple colleges, and so Karen will be doing 3 different episodes on 3 different topics. They're all one-parters. Next week, we look at how colleges evaluate academic rigor. And our college spotlight will be the University of Michigan, and that'll be part 1 of 2. Okay, friends, as I said, I want to read something to you. It's an excerpt from Frank Bruni's book, Where You'll Go Is Not Who You'll Be. And if you're interested, starts on page 11 in the introduction section. And it's a little lengthy, but bear with me. In March of 2014, just before Matt Levin was due to start hearing from the schools in which he'd applied, his parents, Craig and Diana, handed him a letter. They didn't care whether he read it right away, but they wanted him to know that it had been written before they found out how he fared in the college process. It was their response to the outsized yearning and dread that they saw in him and so many of the college-bound kids at Cold Springs Harbor High School, a Long Island suburb of New York City. It was their bid for some sanity. Matt, like many of his peers, was shooting for the Ivies. In his case, Yale, Princeton, or Brown. And he'd laid the groundwork. He'd punched all the necessary holes. Good SAT scores? Check. After studying with a private tutor, which was pro forma for kids in his upper middle class community, he had scored close to the median for students at the Ivies in his sights. Sports? Check. He was on Cold Spring's Harbor's varsity baseball team, toggling between positions of second baseman and shortstop. Music, check. He played alto sax in several of Cold Spring Harbor's bands. Academics, check. He was a recipient of a special prize for junior year students with the highest grade point averages, and he was a member of pretty much every honor society at the school. Character, check. He had logged more than 100 hours of community service. But for Yale, Princeton, and Brown, that wasn't enough. Matt's top 3 choices all turned him down. His mother, Diana, told me that on the day he got that news, he just shut me out for the first time in 17 years. He barely looked at me. He said, "Don't talk to me and don't touch me." Then he disappeared to take a shower, and he literally drowned in his sorrows for the next 45 minutes. He kept to himself all that evening as he tried to summon the energy to study for a physics test. He went to bed after midnight, still mute, still withdrawn. The next morning, he rallied and left the house wearing a t-shirt with the name of the school that had been his 4th choice and accepted him, Lehigh University in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. By then, he had read his parents' letter more than once. That they felt compelled to write it says as much about our society's warped obsession with elite colleges as it does about the Levin's warmth, wisdom, and generosity. I share the following parts of it because the message in them is one many kids, in addition to their son, need to hear. Now, friends, this is the letter. And you know they say imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. I honestly think this is something you should seriously consider writing your own child. So here's the letter. On the night before you receive your first college response, we wanted to let you know we could not be any prouder of you than we are today. Whether or not you get accepted does not determine how proud we are of you and everything you've accomplished and the wonderful person you have become. That will not change based on what admission officers decide about your future. We will celebrate with joy wherever you get accepted, and the happier you are with those responses, the happier we will be. But your worth as a person, as a student, and as our son is not diminished or influenced in the least by what these colleges have decided. If it does not go your way, you'll take a different route to get where you want. There's not a single college in this country that would not be lucky to have you, and you are capable of succeeding at any of them. We love you as deep as the ocean, as high as the sky, all the way around the world and back again, and to whatever you are headed, Mom and Dad. And remember, it's not where you go, but it's what you do when you get there, and it's what you do when you get out of there. See you next week, friends. And that's our show. A big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. If you find this podcast helpful, please follow us, and you'll get every single episode as soon as it is released. If you're interested, there are a few ways you can really support our podcast. You can click the share button and send it to your friends and acquaintances. You can help us pay our staff and our expenses by donating on our website. You can write a review for us on Apple or Spotify. I'm the producer of the podcast, but we have a fantastic team of 14. Shout out to our co-host, Dr. Lisa Ruff, Dr. David Williams, Susan Tree, Vince Garcia, and Julia Esquivel, and to our substitute co-host, Sylvia Borgo. Our sensational sound engineer is Nemanja Motvich. Our amazing music is from Victor Allen Weeks. Marketing designs are from Kimberly Blass. Lily Parikh manages our Instagram. Our image editor is Talha Khan. Joy Stucker does our website episode updates. And our webmaster is Stelianos Dimitriou. If you want to have a coaching session with Lisa or me, just text me at 404-664-4340. If you have a question you want us to answer, or if you have a recommended resource or article you think we should discuss, just send it to questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. By the way, check out our website, where you'll find lots of content that is not on any podcast app. Our website is yourcollegeboundkid.com. you want to learn about other hot admissions topics, follow us on Twitter at YCBK Podcast. We think of you as our listening family, and we look forward to meeting again with you every single Thursday.